The Terran vanguard ship Resolute Dawn broke through the veil of blue stardust surrounding the alien world of Elendra, its sleek hull humming with the silent power of Earth's finest technology, as Captain Damon Holt stood still in the docking bay, encased in his obsidian combat armor, his expression unreadable beneath the mirrored helmet. He had been set not just as a soldier, but as humanity's symbol, an envoy to a species that thought emotion was weakness and war was a disease. And yet here he was, carrying both inside him like old scars. The moment the ship touched down on the glistening landing platform of the Ve'ari capital, sunlight danced across the crystalline towers and silver walkways of Elendra Prime, while a procession of tall, pale figures stood waiting, cloaked in flowing robes that shimmered with bioluminescent threads. And at their front stood Princess Althea, herself ethereal, unreadable, eyes glowing faintly with violet light. And though Damon had been briefed on her power and heritage, nothing could have prepared him for the intensity of her gaze, which pierced through armor and words alike, as if she were trying to read the story of his soul. She stepped forward and greeted him with cool formality, no warmth in her voice, her words elegant and precise as she stated the Ve'ari's willingness to evaluate humanity's worth, making it clear they did not yet consider humans equals. Only curiosities. Then she glanced at Damon's armor, her lip curling ever so slightly, and said something that caught the attention of everyone on the platform. "Remove your armor." The words were not shouted, but they landed like a thunderclap, and the crowd murmured behind her, watching to see what the human would do, expecting anger or refusal, perhaps even violence, because the Ve'ari believed humans were creatures of impulse, not honor. Damon's body tensed, but he remained silent, calculating, then slowly lifted his hands to the clasps on his shoulders, a soft hiss escaping as the pressure seals disengaged, the chest plate falling away with a heavy thud, and he kept going, piece by piece, until he stood in a simple dark undersuit, exposed and vulnerable in a place that had never known his kind. Althea blinked, her eyes narrowing as she stared not at his body, but at something else, something deeper she could not name, for Damon stood tall and unafraid, his skin marked with faded scars, his face hardened by years of struggle, but his eyes were alive, not with hatred or arrogance, but something strange to the Ve'ari hope, raw and burning, like a fire refusing to die. And though she tried to reach into his thoughts with her telepathic gifts, what she found was resistance, a quiet wall, built from willpower and memory, not technology, and it unsettled her more than she let on. She turned away without a word and motioned for him to follow, leading him through the gleaming halls of the Elendran spire, past guards who watched him like a predator out of legend, toward the grand convocation chamber, where elders and nobles waited in a half-circle of translucent thrones, each more regal than the last, their expressions calm but cold. And as Damon stepped into the chamber, still without his armor, whispers flickered across the chamber like wind through leaves, primitive, unshaped, unfit, yet he met every gaze with quiet defiance. And when the High Elder asked what humanity had to offer the Ve'ari, Damon spoke with a calm voice, forged not in elegance, but in hard truth. "We offer you what you lack, not technology, not power. We offer the strength that comes from struggle, the beauty of imperfection, the courage to stand even when all seems lost." His words echoed strangely in the chamber, bouncing off crystal walls like distant thunder. And though most of the Veari looked unconvinced, something in Althea's gaze had changed. She stared at him now not as a creature beneath her, but as a puzzle she could not solve, as someone who should not have been able to resist her mind, who should not have looked so human and yet so unfamiliar, and even she, born into royalty, gifted with the ability to see into the thoughts of others, could not explain why her breath had caught in her throat the moment he removed his armor, or why his presence, so solid and filled with quiet grief, made the polished perfection of Alindra feel suddenly hollow. The convocation ended with no decision made, but Althea did something unexpected. She requested a private audience with the human, a choice that stirred quiet alarm among her advisors, but she ignored them, and as she and Damon stood alone in the quiet observatory chamber high above the city, looking out over the world of light and symmetry, she asked him why he had come. Truly not the mission, not the alliance, but the reason he, Damon Holt, had chosen to leave Earth behind, to stand in a room where he was not wanted. And his answer was simple, yet impossible to dismiss. Because I believe you're not as perfect as you pretend to be. His voice didn't accuse. It invited, and for the first time in her life, Princess Althea did not know what to say, because she was beginning to suspect he was right. Princess Althea stood in silence at the edge of the tall observatory, her arms folded across her silver robe, as she watched the strange human man who had dared to remove his armor before the Veari court. He had shown no fear, no anger, and no shame, and that troubled her more than she cared to admit, because the Veari were trained from childhood to sense lies. Yet this man's mind was like a locked door behind which strange shadows moved, always just out of reach. Damon Holt stood beside her, gazing out at the shimmering towers of Alindra Prime, saying nothing, waiting, as if he knew she was studying him. Althea had never seen a species that resisted telepathic scan so easily without technology, and yet this human did, not with machines, but with something deep inside, something forged from pain and survival. And though he looked tired from the long meeting earlier, there was still a strange calm in him, a quiet power that made her feel uncertain, in a way she had never felt before. Finally she spoke, asking why his mind felt so closed, not blocked like a shield, but layered like stone worn by storms. And Damon answered in a soft voice, "Because if I opened it, you'd drown in it." She almost laughed at the arrogance, but something in his tone stopped her, something too honest to be a lie, and she found herself curious again, more than a princess should be. She had lived her life among perfect minds and polished thoughts, where logic guided emotion and order ruled above chaos. But Damon was not like them. He was shaped by conflict, sharpened by choice, and when he looked at her, it wasn't with awe or submission, but with a steady gaze that saw her not as royalty, but as a person. She asked him what Earth was truly like, not what the diplomats said, and he told her of a world full of mistakes and miracles, of oceans that swallowed cities, of skies that burned with storms, of people who failed over and over and still built something better each time. His words painted pictures raw and alive, so different from the sterile perfection of Alindra. And even as Althea tried to remain calm, she felt something shift inside her, a stirring she could not name. Later that night she returned to her chambers, but could not rest. her mind filled with questions. So she summoned the palace archivists and asked for more data on human culture, history, struggle, and sacrifice, reading until her mind ached stories of revolutions, exploration, loss, and love so messy and loud compared to Vayari history, yet strangely magnetic. The next morning, when she saw Damon again, he was walking through the Garden of Stillness, surrounded by soft white light and floating stones, a place meant for meditation, and yet he walked with hands behind his back, staring up at the sky as if searching for something more, and when she asked him what he was thinking, he replied, "Your world is beautiful, but it feels like a cage." Althea frowned, confused, and he explained that perfection without freedom was just another kind of prison, a thought that echoed in her mind longer than she wanted to admit. Later that day she brought him before the council again, not for judgment but for observation, and as the nobles asked him difficult questions, trying to catch him in contradictions, he answered every one with truth, not polished but sincere. And though some scoffed at his simplicity, others began to grow quiet, sensing something they could not explain. It was after the council ended that one of the younger scholars approached Althea in private and whispered that they had detected something strange during Damon's visit, an emotional resonance field that should not have existed in a non-telepathic being, especially one without enhancement. Althea ordered a scan of the room where Damon had stood, and the results puzzled even the elder minds. Traces of memory, not left by accident, but imprinted with purpose, moments of pain and love and fear, layered in the very air, almost like echoes, and Althea realized with a jolt that Damon's words were not the only thing that reached them. It was the feeling behind them, the depth of lived experience carried in his voice, his gaze, even his silence. Later, she invited him into the Hall of Truth, a chamber used only in moments of historic importance. And there she did something rare. She removed her own psychic veil, opening her mind just slightly, allowing him to feel her presence, hoping to glimpse something in return, but instead of fear or confusion, Damon simply nodded, accepting it with quiet grace. And for a brief moment she felt something from him, not words, not thoughts, but emotion, so deep and ancient it brought a chill to her skin, the grief of a dying comrade, the warmth of a mother's hand, the weight of command, the fire of survival, all wrapped in a single heartbeat, and then it was gone. Shaken, Althea stepped back and stared at him, unable to speak, and for once Damon spoke first, saying softly, "Now you see it, beneath the metal." And she did, though she could not explain it. She saw what made humans dangerous and precious, what made them stubborn and unstoppable. He was not the strongest or smartest being she had met, but he was the most alive, and in that moment, Althea knew something her people had never understood, that humanity had not survived the stars by accident. They had earned every step with pain and passion, and no armor in the galaxy could hide that truth forever. The air inside the Hall of Trials was cold and silent, a place untouched by time, hidden beneath the surface of Elindra where light did not reach, where shadows whispered and minds were tested in ways no blade or fire could prepare for. And as Damon Holt stood at the center of the chamber, stripped of all weapons and armor, he felt a strange chill crawl up his spine, not from fear, but from the sheer stillness of the place, like it was alive and waiting. Around him, the circular room was carved from black stone, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, as if responding to his presence. And high above, in a suspended chamber of crystal, the Veari elders watched in silence, with Princess Althea seated among them, her face unreadable as she prepared to witness the human's entry into the trial of shadows, a rite reserved only for the most dangerous and uncertain of outsiders. None had passed it in generations, and none from beyond the stars had ever dared to try. The trial was not a test of strength or speed, but of mind and spirit, a deep dive into the inner self, where illusions twisted into nightmares, and every fear, failure, and regret came alive, crafted by the ancient psychic core buried in the depths of Elindra's oldest stones. And it was here that Damon would prove not who he was, but what he truly carried inside. As the glowing tendrils of energy reached from the floor and wrapped around his body, Damon closed his eyes, and in an instant the world around him vanished. He was falling, not through space, but through memory, pulled into a vision not of Elindra, but of Earth, only it was broken, burning, skies black with smoke and fire, cities in ruin, people screaming as machines fell from orbit and oceans swallowed the land. It was a memory, yes, but twisted, amplified, showing him his worst fears, that he had failed to protect the ones who trusted him, that all his commands had led to destruction, that humanity itself was doomed because of the choices he had made. And then he saw her, Lieutenant Kara, the soldier he had lost on Titan Station, reaching for him with blood on her hands, asking why he left her behind, her voice echoing louder and louder until he dropped to his knees, gripping his head, trying to shut it out, but the shadows did not stop. The vision changed again, and now he was back on Earth as a boy, standing in the rain outside a shelter, watching his father walk away, never turning back, and the boy Damon called out, but no one answered, and the pain hit like a blade through the heart, so sharp and sudden he could barely breathe. In the chamber above, the Veari watched with growing concern. Most subjects broke within the first 10 minutes, yet this human still fought, his mind buckling but not breaking, his thoughts wild but intact, and Althea leaned forward, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat as she felt waves of raw emotion rising from the chamber below, not rage or fear, but something deeper, sorrow, love, guilt, determination, all woven into a storm of thought no Veari could have withstood without training, and yet Damon was surviving not by force, but by endurance. In the trial he stood again, blood dripping from his hands, and faced the next vision. Earth Council calling him a failure, stripping him of rank, accusing him of risking peace with the Veari, and he simply looked at them and said, "I'd do it again," because in his heart he knew what he fought for wasn't approval, it was truth. The final vision came like a whisper, subtle and cruel. It showed Althea herself, standing over him, calling humanity weak, unworthy, destined to fall, and Damon looked at her, eyes steady, and replied, "Then I'll fall standing." With those words the illusion shattered like glass. The shadows screamed and recoiled, and the energy holding him dissolved as Damon fell to the floor of the chamber, gasping, soaked in sweat, his mind aching but whole. Above, the elders sat in stunned silence, unable to deny what they had just witnessed, for no outsider had ever emerged from the trial without screaming, without being broken, but this human had endured it all and still stood bruised. Yes, shaken but unbroken. Althea descended from the chamber and walked toward him slowly, unsure what to say, because what she had seen was not just resilience. It was something terrifying and beautiful, a soul shaped by fire and still burning with purpose. Damon met her gaze, eyes tired but alive, and said only, "Now you understand," and she did, though her mind still reeled from the weight of what she had felt, the intensity of a species that did not hide from pain, but carried it like armor made of memory. In that moment, something shifted between them, not spoken, not touched, but real, and though the other Viari still watched with cold eyes, Althea felt something different: fear, yes, but also respect, because they had seen the truth. Beneath the metal, beneath the flesh, humanity held something not even the Viari could measure, and it would not be ignored. Damon Holt walked slowly through the silver gardens of Elendra, the wind brushing across his skin like cool silk. But the peace of the place did not calm him, for inside his chest the fire still burned, the same fire that had carried him through the trial of shadows, the same fire that had helped him face ghosts from his past. And though the elders had not yet spoken their final decision, he could feel the shift in the air around him, the way the Viari guards no longer looked at him with pure suspicion, but with quiet curiosity, and how even the younger minds in the palace began whispering his name, not with fear, but wonder. Still, he was not here to impress them. He had come for truth, and now that truth felt closer than ever, because he had seen cracks in their perfect world, heard doubts in Althea's voice, and he knew something ancient and buried stirred beneath their shining towers. That night he was summoned again, but this time not to the council, nor to the princess's chambers. This time it was to the Temple of Insight, a place few outsiders had ever seen, a place where only the Viari high minds gathered to shape the future. And when he arrived, he was met not with ceremony, but with urgency. Althea herself stood at the center of the chamber, her calm face shadowed by something unfamiliar: fear. She told him there had been a breach, a pulse from the deep core, a place even the Viari avoided, a place said to hold echoes of an ancient war that nearly destroyed their world. And now something was moving again, something old and angry, and the elders feared that Damon's presence had awakened it, not because he meant to, but because the core responded to strong emotion. And Damon's trial had left more than just psychic echoes. It had left a mark. Damon listened in silence, but inside he felt a strange certainty rising. Not fear, not pride, but the sense that this what he had come for all along. Not diplomacy, not alliance, but something buried in Elendra's past that the Viari had hidden even from themselves. And when he told Althea that he would go to the deep core, she hesitated, saying no outsider had ever returned from it. And even Viari minds had broken inside, but Damon only said, "Then let's not go in as strangers," and extended his hand. For a long moment Althea said nothing, her thoughts racing, and then, slowly, she took his hand, and together they descended into the Undercity, into the tunnels beneath the palace where light grew dim and the air grew still. The silence pressed around them as they walked, their footsteps echoing like distant thunder, and the deeper they went, the more Damon felt something pulling at him, not a voice, but a feeling like old pain wrapped in flame, and Althea felt it too, her senses flaring with unease as the walls began to shimmer with strange patterns, memories burned into stone by forgotten minds. Finally, they reached the core gate, a wide door of obsidian laced with glowing veins of red light, pulsing like a heartbeat, and as they stepped forward, the gate opened without a sound, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the chamber was vast and circular, a hollow sphere of floating crystal shards, and in the center hovered a single point of fire, not made of flame, but pure emotion, raw and living, flickering in colors that had no name. And the moment Damon stepped close, the fire pulsed and grew brighter, sending a wave of heat and memory through the room. Althea fell to her knees, gasping, her mind flooded with visions of war and ruin, of the first time the Veari had faced extinction, not from enemies, but from their own attempt to control emotion, to erase fear and rage and sorrow. And Damon saw it too, felt their shame, their choice to bury that fire deep and forget it existed. But now it stirred again, drawn to the one being in their world who embraced pain and carried it like fuel. And Damon realized the fire wasn't evil, it was the missing part of the Veari, the passion they had locked away, and without it, they had grown distant, cold, incomplete. The fire recognized him, not by name, but by spirit, and in a flash of light, it surged into his chest, not burning him, but filling him with every memory he had tried to bury. Kara's final breath, his father's abandonment, the look on Althea's face when she first saw his scars, and instead of breaking him, the fire made him whole. Althea cried out, overwhelmed, and Damon reached for her, sharing his thoughts, his strength, letting her feel the truth of what he had learned, that pain is not weakness, that fear can lead to courage, that love only matters because of loss. Slowly she stood again, her eyes wide with tears not just hers, but echoes from 1,000 Veari souls who had never been allowed to feel, and for the first time, Althea understood why Damon had come, why the armor did not define him, why. Beneath it burned something the Veari had forgotten. They returned to the surface in silence, but the change was already rippling across the city. Those who sensed the fire in Damon now felt something awaken inside themselves, memories long hidden, emotions long denied, and the elders could no longer pretend that humanity was weak for in Damon's fire. They saw the truth they feared most, that perfection without passion is emptiness, and only by embracing the chaos within could they ever grow again. The sun had not yet risen over Eilindra when the tremors began, small at first, then stronger, shaking the crystal towers and waking the city with a low, deep sound that came not from the sky or the sea, but from the earth itself, as if something ancient was stirring below once more. Damon Holt was already awake, standing at the balcony of his temporary chamber, staring toward the horizon where a faint red glow was spreading, not like sunrise but like warning, and he knew in his bones that this was not natural. This was the core's reaction to what had happened the night before, when he had stood inside the deep chamber and accepted the fire within. The Veari had thought they could bury the past, silence the emotions they feared, but now that truth had been disturbed, and the force they locked away was not content to sleep again. Damon turned as Princess Althea entered the room, her face pale, eyes wide with worry, saying that the elders had called an emergency conclave, that some of them believed Damon had awakened a curse, while others whispered that he might be a key to something greater. She did not know who to trust anymore, and neither did Damon, but he told her clearly that this was not a curse. It was a choice the Vaari had made long ago, to break themselves in order to survive, and now that brokenness was rising like a storm, they could no longer hold back. Minutes later, alarms echoed across the palace, and Damon rushed to the outer gates with Althea, where a strange sight met them, stone towers rising from the ground, not built, but grown sharp and dark as if the earth itself was trying to form armor around a wound, and at the center of it all stood a single figure, tall and silent, made of obsidian and light, its face blank but burning with the same fire Damon had seen in the core. The guards pointed weapons, unsure whether to attack, but Damon stepped forward alone, knowing in his heart that this was no enemy from beyond. It was a guardian left behind by the first Vaari, a being born to protect the sealed emotion, and now it had risen again because it sensed a threat to its purpose. A figure raised one arm, and Damon heard a voice in his mind, deep and cold, asking why a broken creature of flesh had dared to awaken the flame, why one who bled and feared and loved had touched what was never meant for his kind. And Damon replied with no weapon, only words, saying that hiding from pain does not erase it, that sealing emotion does not make a people strong, only hollow. But the figure would not listen. It had no mind of its own, only an old command to protect what was buried, and it saw Damon as the threat, not the answer. With a sudden roar, the creature struck, its blade arm crashing down as Damon leaped aside, rolling across the stone and shouting for the Vaari to stand back. This was not their fight yet, not until he had tried everything. The ground shook with each step as the guardian advanced, and Damon knew he could not win with speed or power. It was made of something stronger than metal, a creation of both technology and thought, but he had something it didn't: will, memory, and the fire inside. Him that had been earned, not programmed. The fight was brutal, with Damon dodging and striking with bare hands, using every piece of training he had ever learned, but still the guardian pushed forward, silent and relentless, until finally Damon was slammed into the palace wall, gasping, his vision flickering. But then he heard a voice, Althea's, calling to him, and in that moment something changed. The fire inside him surged again, not out of rage but out of defiance, not for himself, but for every soul who had been told to stay quiet, to hide their grief, to bury their truth. And Damon rose, limping but standing, and instead of running, he walked toward the guardian with his hands open and heart blazing. The creature struck again, but this time Damon didn't dodge instead. He grabbed the blade with both hands, pain lancing through his arms, but he held on, staring into the glowing eyes of the being, and forcing it to see not his body, but his spirit. The fire responded not from the outside, but from within, and in a burst of light, Damon shouted words in a tongue he did not know, but which echoed through the ground like thunder. You cannot protect what refuses to sleep. And the fire leapt from his chest, straight into the guardian, not to destroy it, but to awaken it. The creature stopped, shaking, its arm trembling, as the obsidian began to crack, light pouring out from the breaks, and for a moment it looked at Damon, not with empty eyes, but with something almost like sadness, and then it fell to its knees and shattered into dust. Silence returned, but it was heavy, thick with meaning, and the Vaari stepped forward, slowly, not with fear, but awe, as Althea reached Damon's side and caught him before he fell, whispering that he had done what no one else could. He had broken the stone without breaking the soul. He had reminded them that strength was not silence, and now they had a choice to make. Damon, barely conscious, looked up at the sky turning gold with the first true dawn in days, and he knew the battle wasn't over, but the wall had cracked, and through it, light had finally found its way in. The winds over Elindra carried a strange quiet after the fall of the Guardian, a silence that was not peace but deep thought, as if the city itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting for what would come next. And Damon Holt, bruised, scarred, and still healing, sat in the quiet garden below the palace towers, staring at the small ripples in the reflection pool, his mind heavy with everything he had seen and felt in the days since he arrived. He had come as an armored envoy of Earth, wrapped in steel and silence, but now all that armor had been stripped away, not just from his body, but from his heart, and what remained was something the Veari could no longer ignore, something they now gathered to understand. Across the city, the elders met not behind closed doors, but in the open amphitheater at the city's center, a place used only during times of great change, and the entire population, telepathic and logical, curious and cautious, watched as Damon stood before them, flanked by Princess Althea, who now wore no crown, only a simple robe like everyone else, her voice soft but strong as she introduced him, not as a warrior, but as a man who had reminded them what it meant to feel, to fail, to grow. Damon spoke plainly, without poetry or pride, and he did not ask them to embrace humanity, only to stop running from what made them alive. He told them that pain does not weaken people, that fear is not a curse, that emotion can guide as much as reason if held with care, and as he spoke, he could see their eyes shift, some flickering with tears, others narrowing with worry, for this was not a message of comfort, but of change, and not everyone was ready. One elder rose, tall and cold, saying that feeling made their ancestors weak, that it brought war and ruin, that the Veari chose logic for a reason, but Damon answered not with argument, only a question. "And are you happy now?" The elder said nothing, but his silence said more than words could. After the meeting, Damon walked alone through the streets, where children followed him at a distance, curious and shy, whispering about the human who fought without a weapon and changed. The fire without fear, and Damon smiled, not because he wanted fame, but because change had already begun, small, slow, but real. That night, Althea came to him and showed him something she had never shared with anyone else. A vision stone left by her mother, the former queen, hidden until now, and when Damon touched it, light poured into the room, showing memories not only of her rule, but of doubts she never voiced, dreams she was afraid to chase. And Althea wept, not because her mother was weak, but because she was strong and still caged, and it became clear that the choice to forget emotion had been passed down like a burden, not a gift. The next morning, Damon was taken to a chamber deep beneath the palace, a place older than the core gate, where the first leaders of the Veari had shaped the psychic stone that powered their world, and there the elders waited with Althea, asking Damon to place his hand on the center crystal, not to prove himself, but to share with them what the fire had shown him. And as he did, the room filled with warmth, with memory, with raw human thought, moments of pain and joy, of fear and courage, of choices made in the dark, of love not always returned, and the Veari felt it all, not in parts, but as one great wave, and they did not pull away. When it ended, no one spoke for a long time, until finally the oldest among them said, "Perhaps we were wrong." And in that quiet admission, Damon saw the true beginning. Over the next days, changes spread across Elindra, not wild or chaotic, but careful. Chosen places of silence became places of song. Memory walls once locked away were reopened, and young Veari were taught not just to think, but to feel, guided by elders who now admitted they, too, had once been afraid. Althea asked Damon to stay, to help shape the new future, but he said no, not because he didn't care, but because his place was not here forever, and humanity needed him back, not as a soldier, but as a bridge. Still, before he left, she gave him something as armor, now reshaped by Veari hands, no longer cold and faceless, but marked with symbols of truth, of change, of memory. When he boarded the human transport weeks later, Damon looked back at the towers of Elindra, no longer perfect, no longer silent, but alive, and as the ship rose into the sky, he carried with him not just the fire, but something deeper, something older, something that could never again be caged. The shape of humanity, raw and real, now remembered across the stars.